Hey everyone! I am here today with my very first step-by-step how-to tutorial, and it is going to be a tutorial of how to create a beaded necklace. The reason I've chosen this for today's project is because it is something that is very handy, the design of it is very handy for people who have bead stashes, and that is because you can use up any of your odd beads. So as any crafter of jewellery and beads knows, you often end up with the odd beads lying around within your stash, and this is the perfect opportunity to use them up. So we will get straight onto it and start the tutorial. The things you're going to need to construct this necklace are a selection of pliers and a pair of wire cutters, and I use these Knipex flush cut pliers. The wire that I use is this Beaded bead stringing wire. Then you're going to need a selection of jewellery findings, and I'll give you a close-up of those. You will need 2 culotte ends, a lobster clasp, standard jump ring, a closed-in jump ring. I'll show you the difference between these two in a minute. 2 medium size and 2 tiny beads. These little things here are crimp beads. And finally a selection of beads. So I have 1 feature bead, a couple of other larger beads, some medium-sized beads, and then some spacer beads. The first thing you need to do is to measure and cut 2 lengths of wire. And I anticipate that this necklace is going to be about 18 inches long. And because of that, I'm going to measure my wire to about 20 inches because I need to allow some working space, but I don't want to waste any of my wire. On my beading board, I've got the inches measured out. So it goes from 0 up to 17 at the top. So I'm just going to take it to 10 inches on each side, allowing me for 20 inches in total. So I'm going to take my wire. I'm going to unravel a little bit of it to start with, because you can always roll it back onto the spool. And then I'm going to lay it on my beading board, and I'm going to go from 10 on one side around to 10 on the other. It doesn't have to be precise, but just so you've got a rough idea. Cut the wire, and then I'm going to measure myself another length exactly the same. Once you've cut your wire, put it to the side for the minute because you're not going to need it straight away. The next thing you're going to need to do is to organise your beads into an order that you're happy with to thread onto the wire. It just makes it a little bit more organised when you're actually creating the necklace. So as I said, I've got 1 feature bead, and I'm going to put that in the middle.
The slightly smaller beads I'm going to put either side. Then I've got, I think I'll put squares either side of that, with some flat rounds. Then I think I'll go for the ovals, some more flat rounds, I think those 2. Then some squares, flat rounds, and the little round ones at the end.
Once you've worked out what smaller beads you've got, you then need to incorporate them into your design. Generally speaking, I go for at least 2 between each main bead because that helps with interlacing the wires. So I will have a little bit of a play and see which design I'm happy with, and that's all you need to do really, is just to play around until it is a design that you're happy with. So for those ones, I had enough to put 1 in between each bead, and I've got actually 2 at the end, but that's because I will extend this slightly more depending on what beading string I've got left over. So let's do the rest. And with those, there was enough for one between each main bead and a couple of extras at the end. I keep these spare and I even them out with every design so that they are there ready and waiting if I need them at the end. So let's just get on and do the last few. Again, there was enough in those leftover ones to put one in between each one. They're not the same one in each gap, but I've alternated what I've got. So when I do a close-up when I finish, you'll see what I mean. Now we can get on to threading them onto the wire. Sometimes when you first start out doing beaded jewellery, it can be quite difficult to hold on to everything and stop the beads from just shooting off the other end of the wires. And I still now use one of these, and it's a nifty little device. It is a bead keeper, a spring keeper end. I'm not sure of the official word, but what you do is you open the spring up, you put your wires between the layers of the spring and you let go. And what it does is it gives you a solid end that your beads aren't going to fly off the end of the wire, and then you can get on and you can start stringing. Now there's a couple of ways to get started when you're stringing necklaces, and one of the ways is to put your jewellery findings on one end and then bead all the way up against it and then finish it on the other end. But the reason I choose not to do that is because you can accidentally get most of the way round your necklace and then realise that you've strung the beads on in the wrong order, and then you have to strip them all off and start again. So if you use a stopper on one end of your wire, you can then access either side evenly without causing yourself too much extra work. So when I'm choosing where to start with the design, what I do is I tend to start with my first feature bead, and I leave the end ones until last. Because I'm not tying off the end straight away, I can come back and adjust these at any point. If I start with the feature bead, I then know where I'm working from. The way I'm choosing to create this necklace is to put the feature beads on both wires. So then you take one of your seed beads and place it on one of the wires. Now, I've coloured the tips of my wires. I've got one wire that I've coloured blue and one wire that I've coloured red. And the reason for this is because the beads that I'm about to thread on are going to be put on the different wires. So the first bead I've put on one wire. The second bead I want to thread onto both wires. So that is on both wires. And then the third bead I want to thread onto the red wire. And this is what your assortment should look like. So you've got one bead on one wire, one bead in the middle on both wires, and then your third bead on the other wire. So we'll thread these on up next to the feature bead. And you can see they're just randomly on there at the minute. We'll put the next feature bead on. So now you can see that when they're all clustered together, it just gives it more dimension than them just being on one string. So I'm going to show you that again with the next lot. So again, we're going to go for the blue thread, both threads, and then the red thread. And then a feature bead on both. Move them up to the end, and you can start to see there that it will just be more dimensional than being on a flat string. Let's continue. Blue, both red. Feature bead. We've now come to the centre bead. It's the main focal bead and this will be the centre of the necklace. So far I have been threading the seed beads on in a certain order, and it has been an opaque bead, a large bead and a transparent bead, an opaque bead, a large bead and a transparent bead, and so on all the way up the necklace. For it to be even on the other side of the main bead, I need to reverse the order that I'm threading the seed beads on, so that they fan out from the main bead in the right order. So I will need to reverse the order so that I have a transparent bead right next to the main bead, then a larger bead, then an opaque bead. So let's get on and start doing them in the reverse order. Still using the blue thread first, but I'm going for the transparent bead. So blue with transparent, both together, red with an opaque. And as you can see, it makes it even on both sides of the feature bead, so I'm going to continue doing that on this side. Blue, transparent, large, together, red, opaque. And the final feature bead. We now have all our beads threaded onto the wire and in an order that we are happy with. So at this point I can assess how long the actual necklace is turning out to be and adjust it accordingly by adding some of the smaller beads after the last feature bead on each end. I initially start to do this by making sure that all the beads are pushed as far down the necklace towards the feature beads at the middle as possible. So it's just a case of teasing them to the centre and making sure that they are all as tight as I want them. Doing this, I can see that the necklace is actually coming out at 16 inches and I need it to be 18, just so it hangs right on my neck, and I'm gonna adjust this by adding some of these extra little beads that I saved earlier. I'm going to add in the extra beads at the end in the same order that I did the previous seed beads. And then I'll do the same for the other side. At this point, I can see that just by adding an extra 3 seed beads on each side, that the necklace almost comes up to the 18 inches. I'm going to add one more seed bead on each side, which will bring the wires together. This is now just under the 18 inches. But by the time I've added the jewellery findings, it will actually come up to the 18 inches that I require. To finish off this necklace, the first thing I'm going to do is to add the 2 metal silver coloured beads in descending size order. So we start with the larger one. And then add the smaller one. As I said previously, this is just something that I like to do, and I feel that it just finishes the necklace nicely and keeps the wires together. There you go. Now what I need to do is to add the culotte. The culotte itself is like a little clamshell, and between the two parts is a little hole that I thread the wire onto. And I need to thread the wire coming into the clamshell so that the hook is the last piece on the wire. Both threads through the hole in the culotte and just thread that onto the wire. To secure this all in place, I then add a very tiny crimp bead, and it is just a metal tube that I slide over both wires, and I can squeeze the pliers and clamp it down onto the wire. Now sometimes the wires don't go through, especially when you're using two wires, they don't go through the tube. So I like to just slightly squeeze the tube now and slightly flatten it out, and it gives it a little bit more width to get both wires through. Holding it securely with my pliers, I slide it over the wires and I squeeze to flatten it down. I then generally give it another bit of a squeeze and just make sure it is firmly in place. I can then cut off the excess and move everything on the strand up to this piece. So I bring the culotte up to the end and sit it over the crimp bead, and then the culotte will fold around the crimp bead, enclosing it, and you won't be able to see this rough end because you will just see the outside of the culotte and it will just look like another bead on the end of the necklace. So let's get on and just squeeze that together. As you can see, you then have a neat end to your necklace. The loop on this end will be dealt with in a while, but I'm firstly going to move all the beads up to this end of the necklace. So I'm left with a longer end on this end. I can now remove the end keeper piece and put to the side. I can now repeat the process on the other end. So we'll start with the two metal beads in descending order. The large one first. And then the smaller one. Then we add the culotte. Threading both wires through the hole. The difference with this end is that instead of just attaching it anywhere along the length, I now need to make sure that where I put the crimp bead is as close to inside the culotte as possible so that all the beads remain tight on the entire necklace. So let's thread the crimp bead on. Holding it secure with my pliers, again, give it just a little squeeze to accommodate the wires. Put it over the wires. And as I said, taking it down to where the culotte is. Inside the culotte, a little bit of tension and squeeze. And then get your pliers in as far as possible and give it a really good squeeze to make sure that it's secure. You can then cut off the extra wire. And close the little clamshell. So again, you're left with a nice finished end. The last thing you need to do with these ends is to add the jump rings and the lobster clasp to actually form it into a usable necklace. I said I would explain about the different jump rings. This one is an open jump ring, and this one is a closed jump ring. The closed jump ring is soldered entirely shut. I'll use this one for the side where the lobster clasp clasps into. I need an open jump ring because the lobster clasp itself has a closed end. So I need an open jump ring to be able to slide onto this end. To finish the end of the necklace, I take hold of one of the culottes and the enclosed jump ring and place this over the end of the culotte. It can be a little bit fiddly, but practice makes perfect. I tend to hold it against my finger so it can't go anywhere until I get my pliers. I take my round nose pliers and I get the end of the culotte and I just fold that back in towards the clam head. And you're left with the jump ring inside the culotte. To complete the other end of the necklace, firstly you need to add the lobster clasp to the jump ring. Now the jump ring comes slightly open to start with, as you can see, but we need to twist that open just a little bit more to allow us some working space. To do that, you put it into your pliers, you take a second set of pliers and you twist it open like that. As you can see, that gives us a bigger working space. You then take your lobster clasp and place it over one side of the jump ring and twist the jump ring closed again. Like so. And you're left with the lobster clasp attached to the jump ring. All we need to do to finish the necklace is to attach the jump ring to the culotte end, exactly the same as we did on the other end of the necklace. And you do that by just hooking the jump ring over the culotte and taking the round nose pliers and twisting the culotte end round to meet the clamshell. And there you have it, an attached lobster clasp. There you go, it's all nicely completed. This is the completed design, and as you can see, it's an interesting string of beads. It's not just flat, it has a bit of dimension to it. I class it as like a bead cluster. As you can see, the beads just move nicely in a good size order and very equally up through the necklace. So here we have our finished piece, and as you can see, it's just a nice extra to most outfits, and it is a perfect project, as I said, to use up any odd beads that you might have lying around. Well, that was certainly a longer video than I had anticipated, but I hope there was lots of information in there for you to go away and practice creating your own pieces of jewellery. As I said, it is a just slightly different take on just putting beads on a thread. It just gives it a different dimension to your regular beaded necklace. I will be back again in a week's time with another tutorial.